Welcome to Feeling Calm in the Everyday Chaos. Our subject this week, shame, guilt, and the inner critic. What if your inner critic is terrified, not truthful? I'm Heidi Smith, transformation guide and best-selling author of Making Friends with the Boogeyman, Transforming Tragedy into Triumph. And I am so happy that you're joining me or that you're watching this recording because this information is powerful. And in my life, learning that my emotions were actually my allies instead of enemies has changed the game completely. And then learning Sydney Banks' three principles, which showed me that thought creates emotions, another huge game changer. So I am going to share some hopefully unique insights, personal stories, and exercises. So get your pen and paper ready, have some water with you. I'm going to lead us through some breathing exercises because feeling calm starts with our breath. And when we feel calm, everything works better and life is easier. So I'm going to share two breath techniques. The first one is called the physiological sigh. And this, babies naturally do this. Maybe you'll hear your dog do this. The physiological sigh is the first technique, and the second technique is cyclical sighing. So both techniques are 2 inhales through the nose and then a long exhale out the mouth, because it's on the exhale that we activate our vagus nerve, which is our calm switch. So the physiological sigh is a breath we only use 2 or 3 times. And so this is a breath to drop you into calmness quickly. I use this with my clients if they are feeling activated, if they're in a panic state, because the physiological sigh is quick, and then we can do other breathing because now they've calmed down a little bit. Okay, so I'll tell you first, the physiological sigh is an inhale through the nose, about 75% full. Then the second inhale is a quick sniff through the nose. So then a long exhale out the mouth. So we'll do that twice. And then I'll move us into the cyclic sighing for a few minutes. Okay, so and the sigh is something we naturally do, like when we've been in a highly emotional state. When we're resting, we do a long sigh. So as I said, babies and dogs will do this 2 inhales through the nose and then a long exhale out the mouth. And so maybe you've heard that. Oh, I wish I could do it as well as the babies. Okay, so physiological sigh first. Sit comfortably in your chair. I invite you to bring your your shoulders up to ears, and then slowly and gently roll back and down your shoulders. And you want to make sure that it's gentle because I have, now that I'm older, any quick movements can cause pain. So, all right. So just closing your eyes. And so remember, we're going to do an inhale through the nose first, 60-70%, then a quick sniff, and then long exhale at the mouth. And you can make a sound if you want. First inhale, sniff. And the exhale is always longer than the inhales. So inhale, final time. And just noticing how your body feels in this moment, not judging, no criticizing, just noticing and accepting. Nice. And now we'll do the cyclic sighing. So the difference, the cyclic sighing is 2 gentle inhales through the nose and then the long exhale out the mouth. Okay, so inhale about 60%. Don't exhale. Second inhale. Just letting the air fall out of you. So inhale. Second. You're doing great. Inhale. Don't exhale. Second inhale. Inhale. Another one. Set. Inhale. Another. Exhale. Beautiful. We'll do, let's say, 3 more of these. Inhale. 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 Exhale. Inhale. Gentle. Exhale. And with your eyes closed, just returning to your regular breath, noticing your body. This is a beautiful breath you can do anytime. The cyclic sighing, you can do 5 minutes of it, whereas the physiological sigh is a short, like just 2 or 3 breaths to help drop you in, and then you do the cyclic sighing. So thank you for that. All right, so welcome to shame, guilt, and the inner critic. What if your inner critic is terrified, not truthful? Oh, now that we've done our breathing and you're settled, I want to begin with a question. So you don't have to answer this out loud, but have your journal. Maybe you're just answering it in your head. So let this question just land. I invite you to just be curious about this. When was the last time you heard that voice? Not embarrassment, not regret, but that deeper, quieter, more relentless one. The voice that doesn't say you made a mistake. The voice that says you are a mistake. Maybe it woke you up at 3 a.m. Maybe it was in the mirror this morning. Maybe it has been running in the background so long that you stopped noticing it. It's like the refrigerator hum that you never hear until everything gets still. That voice has a name. We call it shame. And today we are going to look it in the eye. not to defeat it, not to silence it, not to fix what's broken, because here's what I need you to hear from the very beginning. Nothing is broken. Shame has a purpose. All of our emotions have a purpose. And my my intention is that with this meeting today, you'll learn more about shame so that you can understand it, accept it, be less afraid of it. So we are coming from innate wellness. Innate wellness, that is your default. What if what you are experiencing with shame is not a character flaw? It is not evidence of damage. It is a very old, very loyal part of your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do in a world that no longer exists. And underneath that old alarm system, underneath all of it, there is something in you that has never been touched by shame, that innate wellness, something clear and whole and quiet. Sydney Banks, founder of Three Principles, called it your innate well-being. And I call it the truest thing about you. That's where we're headed today. Not around the shame, through it. Okay, so got this one. You are already well. Let's talk about your wellness. So many years ago, when I was newly sober and I had no peace, life was very difficult, and my brain was racing nonstop. One of my dear friends just had a baby, and so I went to visit her and her baby Emily, who was about a year old. And Emily was the most precious little soul, healthy, beautiful, with these wide blue eyes that looked like right into you. They were, to me, looking into her eyes was like going into a portal. And I experienced the kind of peace and serenity I didn't even remember. I was just mesmerized. I would sit with her in this burgundy chair in the living room with the footstool, and I'd have my feet on the floor, and she would be lying in my lap, and I would just stare into her eyes. And the profound, bone deep peace that I found was something, like I said, that I didn't remember. And I was so desperate for that level of serenity at that time in my life. I was in awe of her, not just because she was beautiful and peaceful and those fat little cheeks, right? And the little hands. Oh my God, the feet. Emily was completely at ease, right? The babies are just themselves and they are relaxed, right? They're so relaxed and peaceful. You know, babies don't tell themselves that they're bad. Babies don't rehearse mistakes. Babies don't shrink from the voice that says they're too much or not enough. Babies are open, unguarded, joyful. That was Emily's natural state of being, and it stuck with me because it was true. It was real. Have you ever held a baby like that? That stillness, that energy, that energy that comes through them because they're vibrating at such a high energy. What I want you to know is we all started there. Every single one of us came into the world in that state, pure, peaceful, and whole. We didn't have to earn it. We didn't have to perform for it. It was simply what we were, natural. And what I want you to hear is that nothing that's happened to you in this life can ever take that away. That goodness, that peace, that wisdom, that joy, it's all still inside of you. Underneath everything, the stories, the criticism, the shame, the noise, that original wellness is still in you exactly as it was. And I'm so grateful that I have found these 3 principles from Sydney Banks to remind me of this truth, because we all know the truth, and it's just a matter of us reminding each other. And that's why I'm here. So Sydney Banks called this innate well-being, and that is what we're pointing toward today. Guilt versus shame. What's actually happening? Let me start by drawing a line between 2 things we often toss into the same pile: guilt and shame. So they feel similar, they often show up together, but they are doing entirely different things in your body, your brain, and your life experience. Guilt arises when we think we have done damage to something or someone. So we've done damage to something or someone. Shame arises when we believe that we are damaged, unlovable, unkind, inferior, incompetent. Can you feel the difference in your body when I say those 2 things? I did something I wish I hadn't. That is guilt. There is motion available. I can apologize, I can repair, I can learn something and do it differently next time. So guilt has that purpose, to let us know that we've done something that needs repair. And we'll talk more about the reasons behind it. When I think I am someone who shouldn't be the way I am, that is shame. And when shame takes hold, there's nowhere to go. You can't fix yourself. You can't apologize your way out of being fundamentally flawed. So instead, you hide, you perform, you shrink, or you go very, very quiet. And you tell yourself, that's just who you are. I am ashamed of myself. Feel how those words sit in the body. Ugh. That sentence doesn't point at something you did. It points at you, all of you. And this is what I'm here to shine a light on. That it's shame is not an identity. In 3 principles terms, and this is the part I find endlessly fascinating, both guilt and shame are made entirely of thought. Thought, not facts, not truth, thinking. So in the 3 principles of mind, thought, consciousness, thought given form and feeling by the principle of consciousness, experienced as if it is real, permanent, which is exactly how all thinking feels when we don't see it for what it is. So we'll talk about this. Our thinking creates our experience, which our emotions are part of our experience. And there's reasons for what happens in the brain, what happens in the body. And the beautiful thing about knowing that thought creates experience, which is reality, emotions, when thought changes, feelings change. So the reason shame feels so much heavier than guilt, so much stickier, is not because it's telling us something truer. Louder does not mean truer. It's because the thought content of shame points at the self. And when thought points at the self, the mind, which is the universal intelligence behind thought and consciousness, and all three of those are one. They're not steps, they're principles. They're all acting at the same time. So when thought is pointing to the self, it feels like identity. It feels like fact. This is who I am. But it is still just thinking. Thinking that we believed so deeply for so long that we have forgotten. We are the thinker. We are the thinker, not the thought. Beliefs are thoughts we think over and over and over until they feel true to us. But not all thoughts are true. So here's what thinking does in your body. And let me see where I need to go with our slides. Oh, no, let's go back up for a second. Here's what thought does in our body. And this was really interesting for me to discover. Both guilt and shame trigger fear responses in the brain. But because guilt is focused on our actions, we have a greater sense of agency if we believe we can manage the difficulty we face. So guilt is different than shame because guilt feels like we can take action, we can resolve, we can repair. So psychologist Kelly McGonigal talks about a different kind of fear response in the brain. And this is what I was happy to learn. And it's called a challenge response. So a challenge response is a kind of fear response. It, once the fear is activated, then the brain starts releasing the stress hormones, the cortisol, the adrenaline. But in the challenge response, it also releases oxytocin, which soothes and motivates connection. And the challenge response that comes with guilt also releases DHEA, which is a hormone that helps the brain actually learn from the experience. So guilt has its purpose. When it's working properly, guilt moves you toward other people and toward growth. Because guilt and shame are both come from us being social animals, right? Now, shame does the opposite. If we believe we can't rectify the situation or save face, our brain triggers a fear response. So we know those stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, we know the fight, or freeze. All of these responses push us toward safety strategies. So with shame, dominance, aggression, submission, avoidance. These are all strategies when we feel afraid. Blaming, defending, disappearing, going numb. Going numb is a very common nervous system reaction. I mean, when I work with clients, numb is a feeling. And now, listening to all of this, I understand that it's connected with shame and fear. So, lashing out at people closest to us, this is another defense. Any of this sounding familiar? Okay, now let's take this look at this diagram from Paul Gilbert. Paul Gilbert, who illustrates the difference between self-criticism and self-compassion. So we've made the same mistake, but we have different thinking and a completely different experience. So on the left, the self-critical voice, what does it produce? Reasoning that says, I am an idiot. Our attention narrows entirely to our shortcomings, an image of humiliation. So the emotion is shame. The behavior is to hide from others. And the motivation is to defend or avoid. So shame is a closed loop, a room with no windows. You walk in and you cannot find the door. I certainly have experienced that. Now let's look at self-compassionate voice as opposed to the self-critical voice. So the same mistake has happened, but we've got different thinking here. The reasoning says it wasn't intentional. You know, when I was drinking, I'd get drunk and I'd do things, and the the critical way to look at it was, I'm an idiot, I'm an asshole, I'm a jerk. But the self-compassionate way is looking at what's happening, like looking at me as, like we look at children and we can separate the actions from the child. So the self-compassionate way is separating the mistake from who I am. I got drunk, I did some stupid things, I get nervous when I'm around new people. So the attention here is expands to your humanity and to others. The imagery is hope. The emotion is guilt, which, remember, guilt is workable. So with guilt, the behavior is to apologize. The motivation is to learn and repair. So we have the same event, but completely different experiences and a completely different life, a different reality, because the thinking is different. That is the three principles at work. The event didn't change, the thinking changed. And as the thinking changed, the feeling changed. And as the feeling changed, everything that followed changed with it. So remember, it's not saying that the emotions aren't real, that your experience isn't real. Of course it's real. It feels real. Your heart is pounding. All these things are happening. And what the three principles says is that thought through consciousness creates reality. So when thought changes, thought is a fluid, thought is with a capital T, not a small t. So thought is our capacity to think. Thought is this ability to create with our thinking. And we're creating through consciousness, which is our part of consciousness. Our awareness is our emotions, and that feels real. So with a change in thought comes a change in how thought is expressed through consciousness, so it feels different. So this is not positive thinking. You are not being asked to pretend the mistake didn't happen or that everything is fine. You are being invited to see the meaning you attach to what happened. I am an idiot versus I am human and I got nervous is created by thought. And thought, unlike fact, can shift. So this is what we were talking about. The principles, when our thought changes, our feelings change. So when we're talking about shame versus guilt, the event didn't change, the thinking changed. As the thinking changed, the feeling changed. As the feeling changed, everything that followed changed. Our experience, our reality changed. Okay, where shame comes from. Shame did not arrive in you from nowhere. It evolved. It has always had a function. And I feel strongly that when we know that our emotions have a purpose, then we are less afraid of them, we're less defensive around them, and then we have a greater capacity to understand them and ultimately have them help us, which is, I believe, the true intention. So when we want to understand where the emotions came from. Neurologist Antonio Damasio suggests that all emotions, positive or negative, have evolutionary functions geared toward survival. Human beings are social creatures who need interaction to survive. For our ancestors, we lived in tribes to survive. Being cast out of the tribe meant certain death. Think about that literally. Your ancestors could not survive alone. I mean, dear God, I couldn't survive alone today. If I was dropped in the forest and I needed to look after myself, certain death. I agree. I tell you. So our ancestors couldn't survive alone. No shelter you could build by yourself, no food you could reliably find and protect alone, no safety from predators, there's safety in numbers. The group was life, rejection from the group was death. And your nervous system has never forgotten that because we are still the same body, the same brain, the same nervous system as we were back when we lived in tribes. Researchers call this the information threat theory of shame. The idea that shame evolved as a defense against the threat of being devalued by others. At its core, shame is a signal, an ancient one. Your system is saying, be careful. You are at risk of losing your place in the tribe. Adjust. The intensity of shame people feel about a situation, I thought this was really interesting. It closely tracks how negatively others would view them for it. And this holds true across cultures, across 15 traditional societies around the world. Your shame is not random. It is not irrational. It is calibrated like everything else in your body. There is a reason for it. It is running a precise social calculation that kept your ancestors alive. I know this in my bones because shame saved my life. Before I knew all of this, I spent years addicted to alcohol and drugs. I did things I wasn't proud of. And the shame I carried in those years was immense because I was addicted to alcohol. It at that time was my only coping mechanism. And so I would get blackout drunk and do just terrible things like get naked, say, scream and yell and say painful things to people, things I would never normally do sober. And the shame that I would feel if I remembered what I had done, and when people told me what I had done, the shame that I felt, it was so intense, I would feel sick to my stomach. And I know now that that shame was trying to help me stop hurting myself. That shame was a signal. And eventually, that shame reminded me over and over and over and over of what I was doing to hurt myself. but still I couldn't stop myself because I was addicted. Until one day, my tribe left me. The core people that I was hanging around the most at that time in my drinking abandoned me. They refused to have anything to do with me. And that is what shocked me into it's time to stop drinking. So shame, even as terrible as it was, that, like, looking back at this story now and knowing how it felt in my body, everything I'm telling you here feels true. The shame was hardwired in me to protect me from my tribe leaving me and me dying. Now, in today's world, we can survive on our own. So the problem that shame was built for, it was built for a world that no longer exists, a world where the tribe was literal, where belonging was survival. Switching to the three principles, it talks about the design of shame as neutral. That is the gift. The grief is that we took this temporary functional signal, shame, pay attention, you may be at risk socially, and through the principle of thought, mind, thought, consciousness, they're all working constantly. Through the principle of thought, we turn shame into a permanent story about who we are. I am not enough. I am too much. I am fundamentally flawed. And then, when we are shamed, often in our developing years, we become emotionally conditioned to feel ashamed in similar situations, even when we bear no responsibility. So, this is like, patterns. Patterns, our brain is always looking uh, for how to behave, and it relies on previous experiences. And so patterns, in terms of like the three principles, patterns are clusters of thoughts. So when we were growing up and we were made to feel ashamed, then we developed these negative self-beliefs in similar situations. I am not good enough. And so our future mistakes are more likely to trigger shame-based self-criticism. Okay, so when we're growing up and people in positions of authority are treating us in ways and saying things to us that activate that fear response, the shame in the brain, I believe that my parents and the authority figures in my life thought that they were helping me with the way that they were talking to me, because again, the shame, it was meant to protect me, to keep me as part of the tribe. So back when we were growing up, someone else's thinking, a parent, a teacher, our culture, got installed in us as our own. And we have been living as if that borrowed thinking is the truth about who we are. That's where that inner critic comes from. But it isn't the truth, and it never was. Remember Emily, the beautiful baby? We all came into this world in that state of openness and peace. That lovable, joyful spirit didn't leave when the hard things happened. That joyful, lovable light in us, it's still there underneath everything. It's still there with us. It never goes away. All right, so let's do a short exercise. So you've got your pen and paper. So take a breath. And, if you want to get up in your chair, because we have been already talking for a while, little movement. All right. So here's an exercise. I invite you to think of a situation, recent or from the past, where shame showed up. So nothing intense, okay? Nothing crazy, scary shame, just like low or medium sized shame, okay? Because we want you to be able to like look at this and experience these principles. So think of something minimal where you felt shame in the past. Now finish this sentence quietly in your mind or write it if you have paper. When blank happened, the thought I had about myself was. Now notice one thing. That thought, I am blank, did it arrive with facts attached? Or did it arrive with a feeling so strong that it felt like a fact? Because in the three principles, we understand that feelings are always the echo of thinking, not the echo of truth. And I know this was confusing for me because thought isn't just words, thought can be images. I see something and that will connect, my brain remembers something similar that happened, and then the pattern starts and then the thinking starts. So, thought can be an image, it can be something someone says to me, it can be something I say in my head. It creates with consciousness the emotion. And so it took me time to understand that point, because for me, and still now, oftentimes I have a feeling, I have an emotion or a body sensation before I know the thought, before I recognize the thought, before I can see the thought, hear the thought. And so this is something I invite you to get curious about. That even though you may have an emotion or a body sensation first, that there is a thought connected to it. And over time, you'll get better at noticing these things. So, remember, in the three principles, feelings are always the echo of thinking, not the echo of truth. The feeling of shame is 100% real. Consciousness makes it real. That's when we have all these body sensations. The thought that created it is not necessarily true. And this is another beautiful gem from the three principles. Just because a thought comes in my mind does not mean it's true. It does not mean it's true. So, looking at shame, you are not being asked to argue with the thought, just to see it as a thought, to hold it a little more lightly. Because, I remember thinking things so hard. It's like I was clutching them deeply, like, oh my God, the things I used to say to myself, like, I am a POS, I am a piece of blank, like, I, I, I am worthless, all of these things. And I was holding on so tightly to these thoughts before I knew any of this information. And now that I know, when a thought comes into my mind, I can observe it. So then, like, my grasp loosens, like the grip loosens. And so when there's like more calm, when there's more relaxation, then I have a greater capacity to observe, to say, this is something I am thinking. It is not something I am. And that's no small thing. That's the difference between identifying with the shame or the thought and having the thought. You know, I have a thought. I like, I have this glass. I have this. I can put it down. Now I don't have it, right? Whereas if I am the thought or I am the emotion, like, how do I stop being who I am? So it's not a word game. It's the truth. Like, I have a thought or I feel something instead of I am something creates the space so that between the thinker and the thought is where your freedom lies. Between the thinker and the thought is where your freedom lies. The inner critic, your misguided protector. Okay, so how many have an inner critic? Okay, I've definitely had one, and I still do, but honestly, my inner critic has softened significantly, and I promise you that it is possible to, with greater understanding of your inner critic, to have more peace. More peace. Our inner critics can be erosive, exhausting, and even damaging. I know mine was, but they can be very effective at motivating us too. That is the paradox. The inner critic is not your enemy. I know that it's hard to hear when it has been making your life miserable, but it too developed for a reason. It is running the same ancient protection program. If I catch my own flaws before others do, maybe I can control the damage. Maybe I won't be cast out. Think about that. Think about that. That this part of you, I mean, for me, I thought that thing was trying to kill me. I thought for sure, because the thoughts were so fast and furious and so painful. I thought like it could kill me. It hated me. That's what I thought. My inner critic hated me for sure. So, looking at it from this perspective, that the inner critic was actually trying to help me because my brain is wired as a social creature that I need to stay in the tribe to stay alive. And so I don't want to do anything to piss other people off and be cast out because I could die. So the inner critic was trying to catch what I was doing wrong before other people did, to get me to stop it, stop doing it. Now, in three principles language, the inner critic is a thought system. So it's much softer, gentler. Hallelujah. I'm happy to know this now, and I'm happy to share it with you. So it is a habitual pattern of thinking that has been reinforced so many times it feels like personality. It feels like you, but it isn't you. It is a layer of learned thinking, often installed in childhood, that the principle of consciousness has been faithfully bringing to life ever since. So, the principle of consciousness is our awareness, it is our emotions, it's our senses. And so we're having these thoughts. So the thinking starts creating through consciousness our reality, our felt experience. You know, our mind, our brain is doing all of these things for us to feel the way that we do. It is real. So many years ago, I did my own inner critic work, and it really helped me because it's all about bringing things into the light. So like I said, my inner critic used to be very painful, and I can still see what I thought it looked like back then. It was this black animal, this wild animal with claws and fangs and this pointy nose, and it was like digging inside my brain. Like that's how painful it was. And it was terrifying. But when I actually went to look at it, to shine a light on it, this shadowy, terrifying thing became smaller and more manageable. And now, with this three principles information, now that I can understand what shame and guilt are trying to do for me, it's much more manageable. So, what makes the inner critic insidious is that when we try to silence our critical self talk, do you ever notice you try and quiet it, things just get louder? So the inner critic will beat us up for beating ourselves up. Have you ever done that where you felt ashamed and then you felt ashamed of yourself for feeling ashamed? So that shame spiral is exhausting. And it is exactly what happens when we go to war with our thinking. And so here's this new approach from Sydney Banks, taught that you cannot think your way out of a thought system. You can't think your way out of a thought system. The more attention and energy you pour into your thought, even to fight it, the more real and solid it becomes, because thought, mind, thought, and consciousness are all working together all the time. Thought, so mind is the universal intelligence and the innate wellness, all of that behind everything. And thought and consciousness are connected to mind. So thought is the capacity to think. And so within thought, there is thinking. So because thought is a capacity and a faculty, it is fluid and it can change. Like we said earlier, it can change. But whatever thought and thinking create, because with consciousness, they create the emotions and our experience. Whenever thought changes, experience, what consciousness creates, changes, and our emotions change. We don't fight thought. What changes things is not a force, it is an insight, a flash of genuine understanding that lands below the words. A moment where you simply see, oh, this is just thinking. Remember, there's that relaxation around it. We go from this clenching the thoughts as true to like just noticing, just this thought is happening. When we fail to amend a situation, the experience adds to the evidence supporting the negative self-belief. So this is talking about shame. The difference between shame and guilt. So a shame cycle begins where we repeat destructive behaviors like me and my drinking because we don't believe we have the ability to change. So when I was drinking, I was convinced I couldn't stop drinking, and I kept doing self-destructive things. The shame kept building because it was beyond guilt. Remember, guilt is when we think we can do things differently. I was doomed as an addict, or so I once thought. So what the three principles have made clear to me in retrospect, the shame loop ran entirely on thought, which means it could stop the moment fresh thinking arrived. And fresh thinking, genuine living insight, is available to every human being at every moment, regardless of their history. The principle of mind points to this directly. We are all connected to an intelligence larger than our personal thought systems, than our personal thinking. So when I say thought systems, that's lowercase thought, not uppercase thought. So we are all connected to an intelligence that is larger than our personal thought systems, a universal wisdom that is always here, always moving toward health, always available. The moment we stop fighting long enough to let it in. And so this is my hope, is that with this information, an understanding will grow with you about the three principles, about emotions, that they have a purpose. They're not here to destroy you, as I once thought. When our thought, when our thinking changes, our emotions change. And so coming from a calm place where we're not afraid of our emotions, then we have that space to notice the thought. And when we know about mind, thought, consciousness, we know that thought can change and that at any moment a new thought can come in. So let us do an exercise. So we're going to do something that might feel a little uncomfortable. Stay with me, it is worth it. Psychologist Paul Gilbert suggests that visualizing our inner critic can help us clarify and then address our self-correcting voice. And as I've said, I found this helpful. It was a different exercise, but similar idea. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through a little visualization. So I invite you to close your eyes or cast your gaze downward. Take a slow breath in through your nose and a long out exhale out your mouth. Another inhale through your nose, out your mouth. So I want you to bring into your mind that minimal, shameful situation from earlier. And this time, instead of looking at the situation itself, I want you to turn toward that voice, your critical voice, the one that showed up and told you what was wrong with you. Ask yourself, what does that look like? Notice, what does it sound like? Does it have a posture? Does it have a face? What colors do you see? What images? Does it have a certain voice? Maybe it has an accent. So just think about your inner critic. Notice. Often people imagine an influential person who is particularly critical toward them. A parent, a teacher, an old version of yourself from a harder time. Whatever shows up, just notice it without judging it. And now I invite you to get as curious as you can and ask it one question. What are you afraid of? And listen. Don't argue with it. Don't judge it. Just listen. Because remember, shame is fear. It's fear that you're going to be cast out. Underneath every inner critic, there's fear. And underneath that fear is almost always a younger part of you working incredibly hard to keep you safe with the only tools they had at the time. So now I want you to try something. I want you to see if you can speak in your mind, if you can speak to your critic, even if it feels weird or strange, even if you don't fully mean it yet. I invite you in your mind to say to your inner critic, and I always touch my heart, my chest when I'm connecting, I see you. Say to your inner critic, I see you. I know you are trying to protect me. I've got this. You are not surrendering to your inner critic. You're not agreeing with it. You are doing something more powerful. You are stepping outside it. You are becoming the one who sees the thinking rather than the one who is lost inside it. That is the shift Sydney Banks pointed to. That moment of perspective, of becoming the observer rather than the observed. That moment of becoming the observer rather than the observed is where everything begins to change. Everything begins to change. All right, so gently open your eyes if you haven't already, and go ahead and make any notes in your journal if you wish about this experience. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your openness to trying something new. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about the antidote. So the antidote for shame is not self-esteem. That's certainly something that we've been told, that, building confidence, building self-esteem, collecting evidence of your worth. You don't have to do anything here. Now, it's not that there's anything wrong with confidence. However, self-esteem, as most of us pursue it, is fragile because it is conditional. Self-confidence varies from day to day. It is based on evaluation of achievements, validation from others, comparison, and competition. And all of that makes it fragile. Good day, the self-esteem is up. Hard day, the self-esteem is down. Someone criticizes you, your self-esteem wobbles. You make a mistake in front of others, your self-esteem cracks. You are forever on this treadmill performing from, you can't win. You're just constantly moving on this treadmill. And that is not what Sydney Banks was pointing toward when he spoke of innate well-being. Innate well-being is not something you build. It's not something you have to prove. It's not something you have to work on. It is something you uncover because it was always already there underneath the thinking that obscured it. Like Emily, that beautiful blue-eyed baby girl, your innate wellness has never left you. The research points to the same truth from a different angle. Self-compassion is more robust than self-esteem because it is not merit dependent. You don't have to do anything for self-compassion, and it does not run the risk of being disingenuous like positive thinking, which asks us to focus only on our positive traits. Self-compassion says, I see all of me, the part that showed up beautifully today and the part that didn't, the part that is certain and the part that is terrified, the part that is helped and the part that caused harm. And all of this is human. All of it belongs. For me, that practice is learning to love every single part of myself, including the parts I spent years running from. Not because those parts were right or harmless or something to be proud of, but because they were mine. And hating them only drove them underground, where they got stronger and stronger, because what repressed, like what we push down, never dies. Like buried feelings never die. In principles language, this is what it looks like to live from the understanding that your worth is not created by thought and therefore cannot be destroyed by thought. It's prior to thought. It is what you are before the story begins. It is your innate wellness, your light, your love, your joy, your wisdom. Let's go back to the diagram from Paul Gilbert. Self-compassionate voice, your self-compassionate voice doesn't let you off the hook, right? When I moved out of addiction into recovery, I needed to take radical responsibility for what I had done, but I needed to do it with kindness. So self-compassion doesn't say the mistake doesn't matter. It says it wasn't intentional. So in my example of getting drunk, I got nervous with new people. It holds the full truth of what happened and the full humanity of the person that did it, both at the same time. And so we naturally separate children. When they do something bad, we separate the action from the children. The action was bad. The child isn't bad. And yet somehow we forget to do this with ourselves. But I invite you to remember that there is still a child inside of you. And so maybe remembering that will help you separate the actions from who you are. So we only have to think back to a bullying coach or an aggressive teacher or a harsh critical parent to recognize that bullying is not an effective way to create lasting change. The longer term effects are burnout, withdrawal, and people shutting completely down. Your inner critic, if it was like mine, has been bullying you your whole life, and you have been working overtime trying to meet its standards. But it was never designed to be satisfied. It was designed to keep you vigilant, to keep you safe, not to set you free. And so this is where we want to turn to a self-compassionate voice, the right side of the diagram. That is the voice that actually changes things. Not because it is softer, because it is truer. Looking at shame in closing. You are not your shame. Shame is one of the most universal human experiences that exists. Researchers found it operates with the same core architecture across 15 traditional societies on every inhabited continent. So shame is not a Western thing. It's not a woman thing. It's not an addict thing. It is a human thing. And because it is so universal, so deeply wired in, there is no amount of willpower or positive thinking or self-improvement that will make it disappear. Shame doesn't respond to force. Suppression doesn't work. War doesn't work. But here is what I know from my own life and from so many others that I've worked with. Shame dissolves in understanding. There can absolutely 100% be a softening. The moment that you can see it as thinking, not truth, not identity, not the final word on who you are, it loses some of its authority. Not all at once, not forever, because shame is hardwired. It will come into your experience again. But when we soften, you soften enough that all you need, that you've softened enough to take the next step, so that you can look at your inner critic with even a flicker of curiosity instead of terror. What are you so afraid of? What are you protecting? The war inside you quiets just a little, and in that quiet, something else becomes audible. Sydney Banks spent his life pointing toward the intelligence behind life, the health that is your birthright, the clarity that has always been there underneath the noise, waiting, the way it waited in Emily's eyes, for someone to be still enough to see it. That's why feeling calm is so powerful. When we slow down, when our thinking slows down, we can connect with that inner wisdom, that inner well-being. You are not your shame. You never were. You are the one who feels it. And that means you are also the one who can see it for what it is and choose from the inside out what comes next. Remember the diagram, two voices, self-critical and self-compassion. It's the same mistake, but with different thought comes a different reality, a different voice. With the self-critical voice, I'm an idiot, hide, defend, avoid. With the self-compassionate voice, I am human. There's hope. We can learn, we can repair. Same event, different thinking, different feeling, different world. You already have everything you need to step from one side to the other. You always have. You just got a little closer to knowing it. I invite you to contemplate what you've heard today. Let it in, because whatever is true feels true. It's not about the thought. It's about the mind consciousness thought and this beautiful inner wellness inside of you. You are lovable. You are peaceful, and you have access to all of the wisdom that you need to thrive in this life. Thank you.